never give up. I never give up. I never give up. Turn around.
Hi guys, welcome back to Neff Inspiration, a show on YouTube and as a podcast with me, your host, Stefan Neff. Another fantastic day for an interview. And my guest today has for a very long time been fascinated and intrigued by attachment styles. And if you have never really looked into the interactions between couples, between in sort of close relationships, you probably don't know what we're talking about. And indeed, even for myself, having gone right now through a divorce, it was only in the last year that I've learned more about attachment styles, about love languages, about my own needs, and those needs of my ex-wife, which both of which were probably not met. And both of these, this lack of fulfillment, have probably got to do with attachment styles. So today is actually quite a raw interview waiting for me, but that's exactly how we grow through trauma. We turn up, we show up, we are open to communication, we're open to learning, and we are open to our feelings. So, guys, if there's a bit of a tear coming here today, forgive me. But most of all, this is going to be an amazing journey for me to learn today, and in turn, hopefully for you to learn more about your own emotions, how they are driven, and maybe how you can create a new foundation for a relationship that maybe is on shaky ground at the moment. So I've got Bev Mitelman with me, Middleman. She is an amazing woman. Bev, welcome to my show.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here with you and your audience. Thank you for inviting me.
Hmm. Wow. Beth, I mean, you don't just wake up one day when you're 10 or 11 and say, Mom, I know what I do. Because I'm gonna specialize in emotional attachment styles and help people to live a better life. Hey, I've done it. I've
Yeah.
sorted it.
Yeah, no, I wish that was the case. In fact, I do remember distinctly when I was 10 years old saying, I'm going to be a marine biologist. Um,
Excellent.
but I have
Well, is
terrible
that because,
seasickness when I'm on a
yeah,
boat,
okay. I was about to say,
which
well, is
means
that because the fish don't talk back? Or
I mean, I didn't even get that far enough. I got on a boat and I mean, the experience was terrible. I had such terrible seasickness that I was like, okay, I don't think this is the right career for me.
oh dear me. Okay, no fair
I didn't even
call.
get to talk to the fish.
Oh, well, how was it that, I mean, let's rephrase that. Often enough, our childhoods are the reason that we seek out answers to challenges that we have experienced. With hindsight, there might very well be a lot of that in me. Have you experienced something similar?
Yeah, so I think we all go through a particular journey as we get older, where we become more curious about our own mind, right? Like why do I think this way? Why, where is that thought coming from? Or, why am I in some cases, running for a glass of wine or, eating an entire bag of Cheetos or like what am I uncomfortable with? What's going on in my mind? And a lot of times, especially in our society today, we're very busy, very busy. We're like in survival mode, right? And there are periods in our life where it's busier. So I know in my life when I was building my career and having my kids, and I didn't have time to think about, I wonder why I'm feeling the way that I do in this moment. I was just trying to get through the day. So I was absolutely in survival mode. But there came a period in my life where things calmed down. My career was established. My kids went away to university, and I had separated from my long-term partner. And I finally said, you know what? I want to give this some attention. I want to understand myself. And I made a commitment to not only understanding myself, but with the impetus of feeling better within my body and improving the relationships around me. Because we all know that we play a contributing factor, right, to the outcome or demise of any relationship. Or if we're not satisfied with our relationship, what role are we playing in that? And so, it was at that point in my own emotional journey that I found attachment styles. And, with the other work that I had done, I'm talking years ago now, but with the other work that I had done sort of in CBT or EMDR, which is rapid eye movement desensitization, which is a trauma-based therapy. The collection of all these different modalities brought me to a very interesting place in my own understanding. And that for me was a blessing. So I don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole there, but I hope I answered your first question.
Oh, you certainly did. You certainly did. And I'm not here to bring out the dirty laundry, but I sense in between the lines that again, there was actually a lot of trauma. And trauma is ultimately a very good thing. It brings out the best and the worst of us. And it puts us so much outside of our comfort zone that you're literally compelled to start working on yourself. And it's through those moments, the dark nights of the soul, and thereafter the surge of the hero in the story. That is how the hero finally arrives at his quest and fulfills it. And it's those kind of journeys that are happening in each and every life. Yet we are often not equipped with it. We are, I mean, who has been taught or whose parents or close relatives have modeled good coping mechanisms. Yeah, there's certainly nothing of that in my family, I can assure you that. So here I am down the road, and um, uh, I'm grateful for the traumas in my life. I've kind of been enough of them now. I think I've dealt with absolutely everything that there could possibly be.
You're a
Uh,
scholar at this point. You're done.
a master, and I've
Yes.
mastered. I was an escape artist, a very successful one in the past. I escaped with alcohol, with work, with at one stage with sex. I escaped reality very effectively. Well, not for long ever, but yeah, I am. I mean, goodness
You have to
gracious.
take a moment because what you probably know now in your journey is that when you run away from uncomfortable feelings, they spill out into your body, your mind,
Oh yeah.
your world in other insidious ways. So we think we're so brilliant when we're like, I'll just avoid this, I'll numb myself, this drug will make me feel better. But the body remembers all of this.
Oh yeah.
And so it's a coping mechanism. It's not a solution, but we do see a lot of that.
Oh,
And
please, isn't it?
yeah, and it's interesting that you bring up trauma. So everyone experiences what we call micro trauma, so little moments in their childhood to various degrees, right? And um, they've done studies about how we get triggered as adults. So they've studied like soldiers, for example, who go off to war. And 100 soldiers will go off to war, they'll come back, and 20 will have PTSD. And they've asked, how come 20 only have PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, not the 100? And what they're starting to realize is that it is those earliest moments that we have in life that creates the trauma that we're talking about. And then later on, it gets triggered in a way and it comes out. But if you don't have that core wounding from your early childhood, you won't experience those triggers later on, to the same degree. Now, trauma is not what happens to us. Trauma is, those are traumatic events.
Mm.
Trauma is how our body processes it, right? So, and it's important to distinguish that too. Today's generation talks, about trauma sort of in a flippant way. Like the younger generation, like they go to Starbucks and the coffee is, a little bit too cold or not like not made the way they like, and they're like, oh, I'm so traumatized. I'm like, okay, we have to be clear on what trauma actually means. When we're talking about traumatic events, we're talking about events that are really outside of the normal day-to-day life, right? So war, death, anything where like if someone is in like a car crash and their life is in the balance, these are the moments that we're talking about. So
Or
now the mic,
let's be clear about the definition, or is perceived as such. I think
yes,
that is the key thing, because
yes,
you might look at a situation and you are used in your environment to violence and to gang fights, etc. And you look at something and think, this is not even, this is, what's that? That's just him saying hello. Whilst the other guy sees the same, exactly the same situation and thinks, oh my God, he is dead in a moment. So the perception of what is happening and the impact on the life, or the perception leads to the impact on our life and the emotions that are either triggered or created at that moment. Yeah.
yeah, 100%. And so you're absolutely right, right? That's like the lens by which we view all interactions in the
Yeah.
world. So two people can absolutely experience the same thing and have
Yeah.
completely different perceptions or emotional reactions to something,
Exactly.
right? So
And
those earliest years are so incredibly important. If we go back to attachment style, what we're really talking about here is the relationship that you had to your caregiver when you were an infant. Like from the day you were born until about 5 years old is when any child is most suggestible. So if you were in a home whereby your caregiver, and it could be the mother, the father, the aunt, your primary caregiver, was emotionally attuned, right? And they taught you about emotions, right? You understood that you could have emotions, that emotions weren't good or bad, that you could verbalize them. You understood how they expressed on your face and how they felt in your body. You could communicate what you were feeling, and it would be met with a healthy response from your caregiver. Most of the time, no one's perfect. But most of the time, predictably, I would, as a child, know my caregiver is going to respond in this way if I tell them I'm sad, I'm angry, I'm frustrated. That actually develops a set of patterns in a young child's mind where they feel very safe and very secure in themselves and with other people around them. So there's, the concept of trust is formed really early on. Trust, safety, security, right? Now, if you fast forward 20, 30 years, these little children that we're talking about grow up into adults and they go into romantic relationships and they tend to do very well, right? Because they have a strong level of emotional intelligence, a strong sense of, this is who I am. They have a trust in how they feel because they've learned to tune into themselves, and they have a trust that if they're going to communicate to their partner, hey, I was a little frustrated when you did that, that it'll be met in a healthy way. Right? It's a conversation. So these are not the folks that end up being emotionally volatile. They're not the folks that have issues with boundaries. They're not the folks that struggle to say no. They are generally pretty even keeled. And they do very well in relationships because their perception of the world is it's all about connection. Love is all about connection. Beautiful, right?
oh, it is, it is.
Hmm.
And that it makes sense. in all fairness, when I'm sort of thinking about that, and when I sort of compare that with the people around me, not within my immediate family, but rather
We're going there in a moment.
when I look sort of at my friends and acquaintances and those people who, like me, are going through a hard time, which seems currently to be about everyone, then I have to say that you're talking about utopia. You're talking
Yeah.
about some kind of nirvana that is impossible to even imagine. That is something like a Hollywood or a Hollywood film. I mean,
I know it sounds like utopia.
are there figures out there who actually look at the incidence or the prevalence of such a well-adjusted person? And do
Yeah.
we know where this person lives? Kidding.
Are they single?
Yeah, that's right, exactly. Can I have the phone number, please?
They're likely not to be single because
That's
they do
true.
very well in relationships, right?
Well,
So
so
yeah,
so
no,
you've answered without answering. You've answered my question, because we know that the majority of marriages nowadays, unfortunately, fail. We're talking 50% plus, certainly in the United States, certainly in parts of the Western world. Is that not the answer to my question?
yeah, so the statistics will show a little bit of a variance. So the whole description that I just shared that sounds utopian, that is what we would call someone who developed a secure attachment. Okay. So the inverse of that is insecure attachment, and we're going to unpack that in a moment. But essentially, the statistics are anywhere from 40 to 60%. So I generally land on 50% of the population has a predominantly secure attachment. So all of this is
Interesting.
a spectrum. I want to
Mm.
be clear that when we talk about attachment styles, this is not mental illness. Everyone has an attachment style and you fit somewhere on a continuum. So there's very few people that land in one category
Yeah.
like so firmly. And so, you can have people that are mostly secure, but maybe lean a little bit anxious or whatnot. But we are looking statistically about 50% of the population.
Interesting. That's a better figure than
Yeah.
I actually anticipated now. So it's good. There's still hope for mankind, I think.
Yeah, a lot of people are surprised by that. There are some studies that say it's closer to 40%, some studies say it's closer to 60. So, the research is always evaluating, is always sort of updating. But the other thing is it's interesting because, this particular work in social science is studied by people who will self-identify. So sometimes people don't identify correctly, right?
Oh,
So you're asked a set of questionnaires, right? A
yeah.
set of questions. And so it's possible that you're not self-identifying in the right category, but I think they've sort of minimized the error on these particular statistics that for now we're continuing to say it's about 50% of the population.
I like that.
Yeah. And
Okay.
I want to be clear that these people, what we're talking about, there's no such thing as perfection. They are not perfect people. And they have triggers, and they did experience micro trauma events in childhood, but they were smaller.
Yeah.
They weren't as intense. They weren't as, impactful in terms of the patterns that they received. And these patterns that I'm talking about, they're like a set of rules
Mm.
that get patterned into our mind really early for how to give and receive love, how to connect with other people and emotionally, how to interact with the world around you, and trust, the trust factor. This is like I see this over and over and over. And I mean, I could ask you the level by which you trust yourself and you afford trust to other people is very much tied to your attachment style.
Mm.
So before we dive into insecure attachment styles, let me ask you, like on a scale of 1 to 10, how much do you trust your own ability to make, for example, a difficult decision on your own, no support?
Without now evading the question, that could range anywhere between 0 and 10, depending on the day, depending on the the state of mind and the emotions that are flooding over me. There seem to be different personas living in me. There is an ice cold warrior dude living in me that nowadays rarely comes out, but he sees clarity and he doesn't care about emotions. He will make a call, and that call is pure survival, and it will assure that I am getting through a situation. If I have to drink out of the skull of my enemy, such is life. So in this case, I would say 10, and I live with the consequences. And other times, I'm so overwhelmed that I don't trust myself to know that I've put the shoe the right way around on my foot. So hard to say. I would say if I average maybe 7, 8 out of 10 on yeah, I trust what I'm doing. And there's some days when I'm saying, no, actually I'm 9 out of 10. I trust today. Today I know exactly I'm aligned.
You have
Complex
such a
answer.
beautiful
Sorry.
awareness. I mean, it's a fair answer. Like, honest and authenticity is really like, what I'm going for when I have any conversation with people, with anyone. So it's really, there's no bad answer. But have this person who comes out and is your warrior, have you given him a name?
No, he's a scary
He's your
dude.
protector.
He's
He's your
yeah.
protector.
Yeah, okay.
He's your protector. And he comes out when you feel that the more vulnerable side or maybe your more childlike side needs protecting. Honor him, give him a name, and when he comes out, don't shame him. He's coming out because it's
Uh,
generally like as a threat response.
yeah. I don't shame
Yeah.
him. I'm acutely aware of his fierceness. Um, eh, I'm not. Oh, maybe he's the hothead. Hothead is sort of a negative thing. I don't want to shame him or look at him negatively. There's a damn good reason that he is coming out because he perceives that
Hmm.
there's a threat to my life. So he is my protector. So I see him as a Ragnar the Viking standing next to me, or some dude
Hmm.
in some armor with some very sharp, cutting edged weapons, sharp edged weapons. But these weapons are lethal to the enemy and also can be cutting me due to the harsh responses or due to the fierceness of the response.
So I just want you to know you're not alone. I also have a protector,
Uh-huh.
and he comes out when I need him. He's not a Viking. He's a bit of a different mystical character. He has a name, and I honor him. And so there are times, again, I don't see emotions as being good or bad.
Mm.
Emotions are actually neutral. It's sort of the definition or the explanation that we ascribe to them, right? So anger is not bad. Rage is when we, take towards, violent measures potentially to express the anger. So that's more of a behavior than it is an emotion. Um, but to feel anger is simply your body saying, hold on, there's a threat here. You've crossed my boundary.
Mm.
I'm not, this is unacceptable. And in some cases, if you're afraid to say that, your protector will come out and say it, maybe in a way that's a little harsher than you would have
Mm.
said it, but
Oh yeah.
it's there for a reason.
That's a
Yeah,
good point. Yeah.
it's there
That's
for a
a
reason. You know, I heard someone else talk about emotions the other day in this really beautiful way. So I'll share it with you too, because I thought it was a great analogy. They talked about how emotions are like children. They should not be driving the car. Yes, yes, that's just a bad idea, right? Um, yeah, you should not stuff them in the trunk because you will suffocate them, and well, that's illegal as well. And so really where you want your emotions are sitting in the back seat, firmly buckled in, where you can interact with them and you can talk with them, you can hear them, but they're not running the show.
Excellent. Oh,
It's
what
such
a
a good illustration, right?
beautiful analogy.
Yeah.
Oh, I have to steal that. Okay, this is brilliant.
Yeah,
Okay,
I can't
no.
take credit for that. I did steal it. I wish I could give credit where due. I can't remember who said it, but I thought it was a really good
See,
illustration of emotion.
see, in my case,
Yeah.
often named after children, certainly in the past, we're not just unbuckled. No, someone fed them chocolate and espresso in large amounts and then let them loose. I mean,
While
that
you're
was it.
driving the car. Yeah, I
Exactly.
know. Yeah.
Oh, goodness. Okay.
Yeah.
Um, you're so right. You nailed it there. But I mean, here we are. These are already responses that we experience nowadays. And I guess that's a good starting point when you look at attachment styles, because these are clearly parts of our personas that have been created early on to protect us. The Viking in my case, or the mystical creature in your case, the maybe we need to think about how a young person can perceive the world, and in turn what core beliefs can be laid down at such an early age that we then later can recognize as patterns.
Yeah. Excellent question. So that sort of leads us into talking about the other 50% of the population. So we talked about the first 50% that generally have these secure attachment. They do very well in relationships. The other 50% is falls into a category of what we call insecure attachments. And in this insecure attachment, there's a spectrum of subcategories as well. So the first is the anxious preoccupied, sometimes just called the anxious attacher. That's on one side of the spectrum. On the other side of the spectrum is the dismissive avoidant, sometimes just called the avoidant attacher. And somewhere in the middle is the fearful avoidant, which is the rarest type of attachment style. It's estimated that something like 7% of the population has this.
I'm a winner.
Um,
Yes, yes. I'm special. Sorry, I did your test. So for those of you
Oh, did
thinking,
you?
what the hell? Of course, I
You
researched you,
did.
Bev. Of
Okay.
course I
Okay, that's
did.
great.
So,
Do you
so
do you
on Bev's
are you
website,
comfortable sharing?
oh, I am indeed. But it was a whole mixture of things, as you said. So there is
Okay.
Beth on her website. She has got a test that you can do with multiple questions that then, when analyzed, give you a breakdown into the various styles of attachment. And
Mhm.
it was intriguing for me because, of course, you always want to have one answer. And to get four different answers, you think, well, what?
I
And
know.
yeah, but it just shows that we are spectrums, and it just shows that there is
Mhm.
no, neither in medicine nor in psychology nor in any other aspect of our lives, there is very, very, very rarely a pure right or pure wrong or a pure answer. There are always different influences. So yes, fear avoidance
Yeah.
was actually 37, 39% or so, and then a
Okay, so I'm going to
smothering.
write this down. So fearful avoidant was 39. All
Yeah,
right, that's a good start. Do you remember
yeah.
what the next highest number
No,
was?
no, I don't. I don't know.
Was you don't know if it was dismissive avoidant or anxious preoccupied?
No, I
But
just focused on that one, and then I can't remember the others.
I'm going to take a guess anyways as we get a little further on. So
Am I such an open book?
no, it's not. You know what? It's not you. It's because when you do this work long enough,
Oh,
there's cues, right?
I
There's
see.
cues in the language that people see, that people use, their their
Uh-huh.
their coping skills. It's very interesting. So the fact that you've already talked to me about your Viking that protects you
Yeah,
and just pushes everyone away, this is what's happening. I like that's it's a cue, right? That you're using that strategy.
yeah.
Um, so like when I asked you earlier, how much trust do you have in yourself to make a decision? I think you'll recognize that people go about decision making in all sorts of ways. So you've probably been around many people that if they have a big decision to make, they'll ask everyone,
Hmm.
their opinion for input. They have a real trouble to make a decision. They'll do like a survey among all their friends. They'll think about it for 2, 3 weeks. And that has to do with the fact that they themselves don't trust their own abilities
I see.
to
I
make
see.
that decision,
Oh,
right? They need
uh,
that input from everyone else. And so that's one type of pattern that we see within this insecure attachment. So I can dive a little bit further in and
uh,
talk about what these attachment styles actually are, how they show up, and all of that
yes,
fun stuff.
please.
Okay, so we're talking again. It's no surprise that you got a little bit of everything in each category. It's a spectrum. So on the far end of one side, we have the anxious preoccupied. Okay. Now, the anxious preoccupied is someone who generally comes out of a home where, for example, there was abandonment or perceived abandonment. So, a child might perceive abandonment if they're trying to get the attention of a parent who's emotionally unavailable, or maybe a mother who has too many children to mother, or maybe their feelings are invalidated. Or maybe there's another scenario where they feel like they're gaslit, right? Like, I'm feeling really sad. Oh, you're not sad, you're just having a day. Like, so when you're like, right? So
Yeah.
what happens is these people, they grow a pattern very young in life where they realize that um, when they come to their caregiver with these types of negative feelings, their caregiver is not responding to them in a healthy way, right? So if you're trying to get the love of someone who's emotionally unavailable, they're probably dismissing you, they're probably invalidating you, they're not giving you attention, they're not giving you what it is, the reassurance. They're not giving you comfort and love. These are all the things that children need. And so what they do is they start to disconnect from their authentic self. Meaning, if I'm really angry in this moment, as a child, I can choose to say, I'm angry. But if I know my parent is not going to respond favorably or in a
Yeah.
healthy way, then I might choose to just like push that down and instead be very likable, put the feelings of my caregivers ahead of mine, and just play a role almost because I so desperately need their love and attention. So this is the root of people pleasing and fawning, which is a trauma response. So these people grow up, they go into romantic relationships, and they are very accustomed to putting everyone's needs ahead of theirs. And it's very difficult for these individuals to trust their own sense of judgment. They often don't have a great sense of self because they were never modeled. It wasn't taught for them, different emotions and how to handle different emotions. And so as adults, they feel their emotions in a really big way. Although they're the type of person that you meet and you're like, how's everything? Great. It's like they're trying to convince you and the rest of the world.
Absolutely. And
They're
themselves.
disconnected. Yes, and themselves. They're really disconnected from their authenticity because they're going towards likability. Now, the
Hmm.
core wound here, right? And they're going through likability. It's because it's a survival thing. If they weren't like in their mind, if they didn't become likable or more congenial in the mind of the parents, then they would lose the parents' love. So they
Absolutely.
modeled themselves into what they thought would be more palatable for the parents, right? But they continue to do this into adulthood. And so, some of the things that we find is that these people, when they grow up and they're in romantic relationships, they need a tremendous amount of validation, reassurance, like, are we okay? Please don't leave me. You didn't text me today. How come? They're very anxious. They're also don't have very matured skills around self-soothing. So the ability to self-soothe, they're very, very dependent on an external world. So if you tell me everything's okay, okay, now I feel better. But unless you tell me everything's okay, I'm going to sit here and I'm going to worry about it. I can't soothe myself. right? So if you have an argument with this person, they're going to want to talk about it right away. And if it takes 18 hours to resolve, it takes 18 hours. Well, we can't go to sleep. We have to work it out. We have, and so I'm talking in extremes to make it a point,
Oh, no,
but
no, no, no.
but
I recognize such a person immediately. You're just ticking off every single possibility for that particular person. So no, we all have, we are not living in isolation. We are living in relationships, and inevitably,
yeah,
there will be some people, maybe someone even very close to you, who will display exactly all these characters. And sometimes it looks like
yeah,
a
or
caricature,
to
like
degrees.
a extreme version. But yeah, when you suddenly say, yeah, tick, 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 tick. Yes, dear.
Yeah, to various degrees, right? Like I'm sort of talking in the extremes, but yeah. So that's sort of one side of the pendulum, right? We call them the anxious preoccupied. Interestingly enough, too, the anxious preoccupied has almost no relationship to boundaries. They don't even understand sometimes the concept of a boundary. And that's because they're so used to just giving of themselves, but it's not
Absolutely.
altruistic. It's their strategy to be liked,
Sure.
um, because they carry core wounds around. I will be abandoned. I am unlikable. I am unlovable. I will be excluded. I am not good enough. I will be alone. So you could imagine, like, this
Yeah.
is all very burdensome. Now, what's the easiest way to, in a social setting to be included and not be left alone? Well, that's to be nice to everyone. Everyone will
Yeah.
like you.
Exactly.
The class clown. They're funny. The friend who, no problem, I'll drop everything and come see you tonight, right? So they go to the extremes sometimes, right? But this is the patterning that they have in their minds.
Mhm.
Um, if we go to the other extreme of the continuum, the dismissive avoidance. So this person will generally come out of a home where there was neglect, right? So the child, and we're talking about emotional neglect. There could have been physical neglect, of course, but more emotional neglect, in that the child's left alone a lot. The child had to grow up on their own. If the child was, maybe they were in a home with very strict parents, very stoic parents, parents, again, who could be emotionally unavailable, but they certainly didn't learn about emotions from their parents. The parents didn't model that for them. And so, it's possible that if they did go to their parents early on with an emotion that wasn't approved, sadness, anger, frustration, whatever it is, they could have been heavily punished for that. Like in my household, anger and frustration was not tolerated. It was like, you know what? Little girls are meant to be seen and not heard. And so, yeah. And so, I mean, I'm almost 50, so we're talking about another generation, but this was true. And so I learned that if I was feeling angry, I had two options. I could pretend like I wasn't and put a smile on my face. Everything's fine, which is disingenuous, or I could isolate because no one wanted to be around me when I was being authentic and angry because we don't like that side of Bev. Yeah, this is what we learned. And so interesting, right? So people who are dismissive avoidant,
Mhm.
they are hyper independent, overly self-reliant. They learned early on that I have me, myself, and I to depend on. They really value their freedom. Their core wounds, I will be trapped. They have a core wound. Their biggest core wound is around shame. I am defective. So, which means like if I let you close enough to me emotionally, you will also see that there's something wrong with me, like my caregivers did, and you won't want to be around me either. So there's that shame wounds, which is pretty interesting. They're actually very, very sensitive to criticism, and they don't know how to self-soothe either. Their go-to mechanism is shove it down. push it down. So they are generally very disconnected from their emotions. And they are the people that tend to, like the name is pretty apt, the dismissive avoidant. They are dismissive, right? In the sense that they are the folks who, if you're trying to have a conversation with them and it feels too emotionally intimate, they will stonewall, like refuse to engage, or they will take 3 days to write back to a text. They'll leave the room. They'll tell you, listen, you're making a mountain out of a molehill. Why do we always have to talk about feelings? Because for them, it is so uncomfortable to be in that vulnerable place to talk about someone else's feelings when they're so disconnected from their own. Like, it's so uncomfortable for them to be in that place that they've developed a whole system, coping mechanisms to keep themselves distanced from those difficult emotions they don't want to feel. And in this subgroup of people, we often see addiction. We
Mm.
often see addiction in those with the anxious preoccupied too. So the anxious preoccupied is feeling their feelings so big. So there's often addictions because I just need something to numb it out because it's like it's just taking over. And on the dismissive avoidance side, um, they are using substances to numb, to push their emotions down even further. They don't want to think about it. And so these are the folks who are very, they do have, for the most part, a fear of emotional intimacy, to be truly seen. They're very, very slow generally to commit to any type of relationship. Um, and yeah, in these two cohorts of people, the anxious, preoccupied, dismissive, avoidant, we see tremendous levels of emotional dysregulation. So the emotional volatility is very high.
Absolutely.
And so you could imagine
Mm.
uh, that these folks have a much harder time in relationship. And oftentimes, as luck would have it, the dismissive avoidant and the anxious preoccupied date each other.
Oh,
Which is like,
you're spooky. You are so spooky because I think the dismissive avoidant pretty much describes me in my 20s and
hmm,
30s.
I had a feeling.
Yeah, and yes, and I think the very first description fits very much my ex-wife. So I think you're so right. You're on the money here, and it's spooky. But it's interesting to see that we have these different personas, or it's not personas, these different
It's
patterns
learned behavior.
emerging.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's different patterns of behavior that are emerging at different times in your life. And it's interesting to have, it would be lovely to have a time machine and actually complete the same questionnaire in my 20s, 30s,
Yeah.
40s, 50s, and actually see how
Yeah.
we develop over time. Because obviously these patterns have got consequences, and we become increasingly aware of them. On this emotional intelligence is developing one way or the other. So therefore, we might recognize them, and we might actually work on the underlying pattern and maybe come out with a different consequence.
Um,
Wow.
Not everyone does, by the way, Neff. So it's so interesting because yes, if you put in an effort to understand and do the work, now these patterns are in the subconscious mind. So there are very specific tools and techniques that we use to move people out of these old patterns that are no longer serving them and into more towards secure attachment. But I promise you that if a person it stays unaware their entire life of these patterns and how their childhood has imprinted onto them these rules for how to give and receive love, that they will take the questionnaire at 20, 30, 40, 60, and it'll be the same results.
Okay. Interesting. Interesting.
Because we don't just like we have to actually make a concerted effort to first of all become aware and then secondly create new patterns, right? So
Wow.
this is not something that's just done, it doesn't
Mm,
just happen over time.
mm,
But most importantly, because this is learned behavior, we know that we can unlearn it and relearn. So it's not genetically inherited. Like someone asked me a question last week, do we inherit these patterns from our parents? We don't genetically, biologically inherit this. We adopt the patterns because that's what we witness. That's what we experience, right? So like our parents set forth our perception for us.
mm.
So, but it can be changed, absolutely.
Is it also a type of modeling that is happening there? Is it if I were to score high in a certain subgroup of or a certain pattern, is it likely that that the dominant parent would equally display a similar style?
Beautiful question. Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
There's so many expressions that sort of explain this, right? Like
Yeah.
the apple doesn't fall far from the tree and this, but there's truth behind this stuff. So, and then the other question that I get often in a romantic context is it true that if I'm a woman, that we fall in love with our fathers, or if you're a man, that we fall in love with our mothers, or like, is that true? Not so much. What's actually been shown is that we gravitate towards a partner by which we have a dynamic with them that is familiar to us.
Ah,
So it's
ah,
the emotional dynamic that we actually recreate, and subconsciously, maybe even unconsciously, we're
ah.
trying to replay out that story and have a different ending, right? To almost heal the wound there. So yeah.
Hmm.
That's
Interesting.
right. Yeah.
Interesting. So I found it intriguing because the two more common patterns both start with parents that are emotionally not present or that are basically distant. And unfortunately, I mean, through often external pressures. There are so many people out there who are struggling with their own life, having children. They're struggling to put food on the table. So there's constant monetary pressures, financial pressures. There is friction in the household. There might be poor coping mechanisms themselves. So if we look at those kind of social pressures, do we see these different attachment styles more predominantly in stressed environments, or is that actually going for all strata of society?
So, absolutely, the more stressful the environment, depending on the level of emotional maturity,
Hmm,
emotional intelligence, and regulation of the parents.
hmm,
That's what this is about. Because again, there's no perfect scenario.
ah,
So, if you're able to provide a sense of safety, security, and predictability to the child,
right.
that's what they need. So I might be really short on time, but my child knows that every day from 4 to 4:30 when I come home, we're going to go for a walk and have a talk. That's our time, right?
Nice,
So it's
nice.
not about, yeah, and they might know, and I might say to them, look, as they get a little bit older, if you have anything you want to talk to me about, please come talk to me.
Hmm,
And if they come talk to me and they tell me about some trouble they're in and I punish them,
hmm,
I've broken that trust, right?
hmm,
And so it's about building trust and providing safety and security for your child to be authentic. So if you're angry in this moment, that's fine. You can tell me you're angry and
hmm,
let's talk about here are the healthy ways to deal with it. Why don't you take 20, 30 minutes by yourself? You
hmm.
could read a book, you can play video games. What you can't do is yell at me and throw things around the house.
Love
Right?
it.
Like, but
Absolutely love
and
it.
so that's what we're teaching. Anger isn't bad, but
Hmm,
I know it's a really icky feeling, but here's some ways that you can let it out, right?
nice,
And
nice.
so that's what we're teaching. And
Beautiful.
again, every parent is strapped for time and every parent is rushing out the door. And so
Mm,
we're just, again, we're talking about honoring like and respecting the child as the person that they are, not
mm,
forcing them
mm.
to mold into something else so they become lovable in your eyes, right?
Exactly. So
So, yeah.
no, it's intriguing. It's intriguing. It's also intriguing for me to try to get to wrap my head around the different patterns that clearly are living within me. I would have expected far more a predominant style, yet the way you have described them, I can recognize me in myself in every single one of them. So, and that's so bizarre. That's sort of
And we're not done
No, I was
because we're
about to
not
say
done.
the fear avoidance is still missing.
Yes, that's
I'm not
right. We're not
evading that.
done.
I'm leading you back to there. So okay, come on then. Since this is
That was a great segue.
my dominant pattern,
Attachment
at least at
style.
this attachment style at this stage. Um, uh, well, let's bring it on. What
Yeah.
is the fear
So I mean,
avoidance?
so there is this other style, and in literature, sometimes it's called the disorganized attachments, and it's an interesting name. I use fearful avoidant, but disorganized is an apt name. So in a romantic relationship, these partners are often called the hot and the cold partner. One minute they're hot, they're all in, the next minute they pull away, which
Mm,
means that this particular individual experiences both high anxiety and high avoidance, which is a real difficult ball of wax, right? To feel it and also to be in a relationship with this person. So I spent predominantly my life as a fearful avoidance and I've lived it. I understand it well. Until I found this work and I've moved a lot closer to secure attachment. But if you understand sort of the beginnings of this, the roots of where it comes from, we talked about the anxious, preoccupied, being in a home where there was abandonment or perceived abandonment, and the dismissive avoidant being in a home where there was neglect, right? They were left alone, they were sort of on their own. In the case of the fearful avoidant, what they predominantly experienced was abuse and or a really highly chaotic environment, a lot of yelling, a lot of fighting, a lot of like a high conflict divorce, right? Where there was no stable frame to the home.
mm,
And so really what comes out of this is a child who is naturally drawn towards their caregiver for love and affection, as all children are, because that's all children want, that validation, that reassurance, that comfort. But in most cases, they're also being harmed by that same person physically, emotionally, psychologically, could be sexually, could be all of the above. And so the child develops this really disorganized, pattern in their psyche of, well, I really want to move towards this person because, I'm reliant on them for love and for attention and for food and safety and security and but they're also the one hurting me. I'm also deadly afraid of them. And so you could imagine that when these folks grow up, they really do crave connection, as all humans do,
mm,
but they deeply fear intimacy. And so they have traits of both the anxious, preoccupied and the dismissive avoidant. And they tend to oscillate, which means that, let's say, if you and I, we were in a relationship, and let's say, for the sake of argument, I'm a fearful avoidant and you're a dismissive avoidant. That means that my anxious, preoccupied side would take the driver's seat because you're being dismissive towards me, I become more anxious. And the inverse is true as well. If you were anxious, preoccupied, we're still in the same relationship, but you're anxious, preoccupied, I typically will become more dismissive. So the fearful avoidant really does go back and forth in this disorganized pattern.
mm,
Um, there's some very interesting things about the dismissive, sorry, the fearful avoidant. Um, we're very, very big on things like trust, transparency, depth. Like when I get into a relationship with someone, I need it to go to a level of depth because I'm trying to understand if I can trust this person. Transparency. If I get a smidgen of, deceit, like you're being deceptive with me, I get scared. I back away, right? So I need that high degree of transparency to feel safe, right? And a few other interesting things, fearful avoidance really enjoy things like variety in life. And this is interesting. We'll see patterns of fearful avoidance that move a lot, like move homes a lot, move cities a lot, change careers often, change partners often, because some of that chaos is familiar in terms of what we experienced in our childhood. So when something is too still, too stable, it almost feels boring to someone who's fearful avoidance. They're like, "Where's the spark?" I don't know.
Oh
Like this
yeah.
is just a little bit too even keeled, right? That's our mind tricking us because our subconscious mind, it doesn't do us any favors. It just our subconscious mind just brings us towards what's familiar, not what's good for us. So the last thing I'll mention that's an interesting quality about the fearful avoidance is that we have developed really early on as a survival strategy is hypervigilance. Now, some people say, I can feel other people's emotions and I'm just an empath, you're not an empath. You're hyper vigilant, and you develop this as a skill, which means that when you're in a room with other people, you can sense the vibe of other people really quickly. You can tell, if someone is going to become angry, you can tell if the mood has shifted. You're incredibly sensitive to small degrees of input around energy because that's how you stayed safe in childhood because you had to be able to discern if your caregiver came home, are they in a good mood? Are they drunk? Are they going to hit me? Do I need to hide? And so you could at one point, probably discern the mood of your caregiver by their footsteps. So you become an adult and you're watching, you're mindful of your environment. You can never really fully relax when you're in that state because you're worried, do I need to exit? So these patterns follow us. And
Interesting.
again, uh it's incredibly interesting. Now, did I hit on some things that resonated with you with that description?
Heaps, heaps. And it's certainly, again, at various stages in my life, you ticked me off perfectly. Certainly in my early 20s, I was probably very promiscuous, you could say, and I was very good in portraying this perfect persona, this kind of the I don't know. I was very attractive to women, and in turn, I had like a butterfly. It is, yeah, today I'm on this plant, and then tomorrow, or typically 2, 3 weeks to 2, 3 months, I would say, no, it's enough, and then just go away and find a new partner. And it
Can
was,
I stop you there? Can I
shoot,
stop you there? In that moment where after 2, 3 weeks, and you're like, and because you made a face that was really revealing, you were like, go away. Did you get this moment of like an ick? Like they
yeah,
did something or they
yes,
said something, and you're
yeah,
like, okay, I'm turned off. Bye.
yeah, yeah.
Right. And you cut it off. Okay. So that is that is typically what happens with someone who is dismissive avoidant. And that is a strategy. The ick is a strategy for you to maintain emotional distance from someone. So
Hmm.
you create a problem, and it's usually something very small.
Hmm.
Like Seinfeld used to do this all the time. Did you ever watch Seinfeld?
Not really.
No? Okay. I bring it up because the main character, Seinfeld, finds fault with every woman he dates after 2, 3 weeks. Her
Right.
hands are too big. She chews too loud. Like it's not important things at all, right? But he does this as a way to go, oh no, no, she's not right for me. Bye. Because he doesn't want to emotionally connect to anyone too deeply.
Right.
Now, the other interesting thing, I'm sorry, because I want to hear more for you, but I want to tell you that the concept of hypersexuality is very prevalent with um, fearful avoidance. So, because if you think about it, so sex does some really interesting, like we all engage in sex for different reasons, right? An anxious preoccupied will engage in sex with their partner to feel emotionally close to them, right? But that's not everyone. So oftentimes sex is a beautiful midway point for someone who is fearful avoidant to meet their need for connection, but not get too close. So I think you and I both know that there are many ways to have sex. Some ways are extremely intimate and you're looking into each other's eyes and you're making love. And other ways are far less intimate, right? It's a physical act. But
Yeah.
for someone who wants the physical connection and doesn't want to engage in the intimacy and the emotional because it scares them, sex is a really nice little sweet spot for them. And so they do tend to engage in a lot more casual sex. They tend to have a lot more partners. But so this is what we see in the research. They also tend to, I don't know if this interests you, they also tend to be a lot more exploratory with sex, right? It goes back to their craving for variety. So these are the folks that generally are open to like talking, experimenting with BDSM, like anything in that world, dominance, submission, that really interests them. So there is there's a strong correlation between your attachment styles, your sexual behavior, selection of a mate, the sexual acts that you enjoy, that you don't enjoy. It's all tied together.
Oh, it's spooky. It's spooky when you start pulling things apart and actually shining a torchlight into sort of the nooks and crannies of a relationship and suddenly figure out that it is all related, that it is all explainable, that there are no surprises ultimately. So
Mm.
should should any young person nowadays, or any person of any age, before going into a relationship, should you actually do attachment patterns? Should you actually do a test
Yeah.
and actually figure out what you are? I think I'm answering my own question because ultimately, over the last year, due to my divorce, I have done so much emotional intelligence work that I am a completely different man now compared with even October last year. So, I mean, full stop. And that's the answer. Because definitely today, if I was to go into a new relationship at some stage in the future, I would be so much more aware of my own emotions, my feelings, so much more aware right now. I mean, you opened my eyes with regards to certain patterns within my life. And also patterns of course, the opposite sex or a future partner. So the answer is yes. The more we all can learn about ourselves to start off with and show ourselves the real raw compassion, the self-love. With that, I don't mean anything. What do I mean? I mean literally self-love, from actually
Yeah.
you hugging yourself and giving yourself the emotion, the dopamine, the reassurance. Stefan, I
Mm-hmm.
love you. You're okay. You will
Mm-hmm.
survive. You will go through that. That degree of self-love, that acceptance,
Yes.
radical self-acceptance. I think
Yes.
only then can we learn more about us and recognize, rightly or wrongly so, how we show up in daily life, why we make certain decisions, why we end up maybe with similar partners, or why maybe also business relationships turn sour, why we self-sabotage, or why we procrastinate and therefore do not achieve our goals in life. these things are all interrelated. And often enough, we won't have
They're
it.
absolutely interrelated, and you're doing a beautiful job at like, putting together the pieces that they are.
Mm,
And so, I always tell people, invest in yourself, learn about your own
mm,
patterns.
exactly.
Start with awareness. Like you mentioned on my website, there's a little quiz. Great, do a little quiz, see where you fall. And again, it's important to state that the three subcategories that we talked about, anxious, preoccupied, fearful, avoidant, and then the dismissive avoidant, they all fall in that insecure attachment. Now, everyone who has insecure attachment has one common core wound, which is I am unsafe. So when you're carrying
Mm,
around that I am unsafe,
mm,
it does impact your emotional regulation. So most people who are, leaning on the insecure side, they can absolutely benefit from learning skills that they likely didn't learn in childhood. This is
mm,
not to shame anyone.
mm,
Emotional regulation is a skill,
mm,
right? But first recognize that maybe you aren't emotionally regulated and you
mm,
can learn that. And the byproduct of becoming more secure and emotionally regulated is that you will feel so much better in your body. Like your anxiety will calm down, your thinking will be clearer. You'll be able to embrace, if you're busy stuffing down your emotions, for example, the mind doesn't know how to selectively stuff down some emotions. It stuffs all, which means that you also can't feel joy and
uh-huh.
pleasure. And so, bring yourself back to a place where you can be present. And so that's the real benefit. It's like it's for you.
Mm,
But then when you go into the world and you interact with anyone else, family members, colleagues, friends, romantic partners, you will do so from a much better, stable place.
mm,
And you'll be able to say, listen, these are the things that are important to me. Because part of the work that we do is we don't only just look at the core wounds, but then we also work with our clients to identify their personality needs,
mm,
and their relationship to boundaries,
exactly.
their communication style, and their coping mechanisms, right? So, yeah,
Mm,
I think it's incredibly important work. I shared with you,
mm,
I think before we started filming, that your attachment style is the biggest predictor
mm,
for the quality of relationships that you will
mm,
have in your life. And it reminds me many years ago, I was having dinner with some friends, and my friend said to me at the time, you know what, Bev, can we just drop this whole mask thing and just be like really honest with each other? Like, if we're friends for the next 20 years, can we just say what's on our mind and like promise each other that we're not going to offend each other? And I was like, yeah, let's do that. Okay. And that level of authenticity and honesty, I have now mirrored that in every relationship that I have because it was the missing mark. So if you're saying something to me and it's your honest truth, great. Tell me. I might
mm,
not like what you're saying, but let's be authentic with each other, right? That's what it is. And it's also that's what healing is about too. Healing is about being authentic with yourself in that, okay, I'm feeling all of these emotions. And some of those emotions we don't want to talk about. Like, I don't want to talk about the things that I'm feeling shameful about,
exactly.
right? Or that embarrass me, or, but when you go down a path of healing, you go, okay, all of this is a part of me. And I'm
Exactly.
accepting and loving all of the parts that bring me pride and also bring me shame. And, I'm just going to accept it as all parts of me. And so it's a mindset. It's a change in mindset. It's a change in paradigm where you're like, you learn to connect to yourself, to your emotions.
Mm,
You learn to accept the emotions. You learn that if you are triggered, okay, you can be triggered, but knowing that you have invested the work that you have, you know that The trigger will pass. You'll feel better soon, a couple of hours, maybe a day, it'll pass. You'll go back to baseline. And then, you know what? I can communicate to someone and go, I know I was supposed to go out with you tonight, but I'm just really not feeling well. I'm sorry. Can we reschedule? Instead of, which is what I used to do all the time, trying to please the other person at my expense, even if I didn't feel well, I had like a migraine. I'm like, okay, I'll meet you at 8 because I was afraid to, upset them, right? But you self-abandon in those moments.
Yeah.
So I think, yeah, authenticity, trust is like at the root of all this work.
Hmm. What beautiful insights. And you saw me often in this interview, sort of just looking away where I'm putting all the puzzle pieces together in my life as well as in our interview here. I think one of the intriguing things is that I see these patterns. I recognize these patterns as defense mechanisms when it comes to PTSD, when it comes to those kind of things. I was not acutely aware that ultimately PTSD is a mental health diagnosis in
It
relation
is.
to a perceived threat against your life and then flow-on effects of that, whilst essentially to a lesser degree these micro traumas or mini traumas have occurred in at a very early stage and have resulted in similar patterns. Because you described the fawning, you described all the typical post-traumatic responses that you can develop. And it was actually really beautiful. So to see that as a continuum with similar patterns arising with lesser degrees of trauma, so to speak, often things, trauma that we are not even aware of. Because if I was to look back, my mom never hit the shit out of me. Certainly I was not abused in the clinical sense of it. Yet at the same token, there are certain patterns that clearly, and certain, just the way you describe things, where I said, okay, yes, divorce at age 4. Yes, I remember a coffee cup flying this way, and I remember this cup of cocoa of Nesquik flying, and it was the Nesquik powder, and it sort of came across, turned over, the Nesquik sort of came across, sun was shining through. That was one of my earliest memories. So obviously this was not a stable environment in which I grew up. And interestingly enough, those qualities nowadays that I have attributed to a severe trauma later in my youth at age 13 may very well have been already been laid down at an earlier stage as patterns which were then magnified, catalyzed with a more succinct trauma at age 13. So talking about being set up to fail, or set up to behave, set up to be a certain type of man, and that's intriguing.
Mhm.
But that's
Yeah.
how you learn, and you can't do anything about that. But you can
Well,
acknowledge
I
it.
mean, you can. So we do have tools where we can repattern some of
Absolutely.
these, right? So,
So please let me rephrase that. I can't go back in time and unchange my
oh,
childhood or unchange the trauma that had occurred to me, the traumatic event that had occurred. I can't do anything about that, but I
no.
can acknowledge the consequences, the patterns of behavior that have been laid down
Yeah,
subconsciously. And now I have got the freedom, the privilege, and maybe the duty to actually address those patterns and see if they are still making sense, if they are still helping me to be the best version of myself. And some of it
yeah.
will be the hypervigilance. I don't want to get rid of that. I know I can sense a lot of things around me, and the
Mhm.
situational awareness will probably save my life, and probably has saved my life, and probably has saved my career in the past multiple times because it's hard to catch me out. Yet there are other parts of this pattern that maybe are not so productive, maybe are counterproductive. And that's where we have got now the privilege to address things. So give us a bit of a sneak preview here. I mean, what are ways that we can address something that in my case has been there for what? The better part of 50 years? I mean, for crying out loud, how the
Yeah.
hell do you want to scratch that LP, that vinyl record? You want to take a big screwdriver to it and say, no, we don't want to have that pattern again. That will never sound the same. But how do you do that?
Yeah, so it's very interesting work. I generally start with my clients in present day. So I'm looking for what's triggering you today. So I'll generally start and ask, tell me about something that happened in recent memory, yesterday,
Right.
last week,
Yeah.
that carried a really strong emotional charge. It really got you upset, angry, frustrated, you felt shameful, whatever. Tell me about a scenario. And I'll ask for a couple of stories. And what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to see the pattern of where the core wound might be. So, for example, people will tell me stories like, I some idiot cut me off when I was driving and I honked my horn. I got really upset and then I flipped them the bird. I hear this story, right? And I go, okay, why did you do that? Well, it was really disrespectful. Oh, okay. So we hit on a core wound. I feel
Okay.
disrespected, right? And then the next story they'll tell me, for example, maybe a disagreement that they got into with a colleague, and they both presented ideas, and his idea wasn't chosen. And I'll say, how did that make you feel? Well, overlooked. Did you feel disrespected? Damn right, I felt disrespected. Okay, so we're seeing a pattern
Right.
here.
Right.
So this is the work that we do is to, okay, in present day, what is triggering you?
Yeah.
And you can be sure that in the same scenario, like I don't have a core wound, I will be disrespected. That's not one of my core wounds. But so if my idea wasn't chosen, I wouldn't have an emotional reaction. I would say, good on you. I got to come up with a better idea next time. But because this fictional person we're talking about has a core wound, it's going to impact them. It's
Right.
brushing up against a wound that's already there, right? So we're trying to discover where are the wounds, and
Mhm.
then we can use very specific tools to repattern our subconscious mind. Now, the subconscious mind is very interesting, right? Because we use our conscious mind 3 to 5% of the time. That's like our awareness for, things like, yeah, our emotions, our thoughts, our behaviors. And our subconscious mind is really the one running the show. The subconscious mind that holds all these patterns that we've been talking about runs the computer program, as I like to say, 97% of the time.
Right.
And it does it behind the scenes. And people have a hard time accepting this because they're like, no, I'm totally aware of my thoughts. You're aware of your thoughts that are in your conscious mind, but you
Bullshit.
have all this programming that is leading you,
Mhm.
in a certain direction. So this is why we see this pattern all the time of people moving towards things and other people that are familiar to them, even against their better judgments. Like people are like, I don't know why I always end up with a partner who is,
Right.
narcissistic. Well,
Right.
it's because your patterns, that's what's familiar. The subconscious, it's not sitting there discerning what's best for Bev. It's pulling you magnetically towards what's familiar. Like, so I already know how to deal with this type of scenario. So like I have the survival skills, so I'm good. So that's why there's often a disconnect between people's actions, like what they say they want to do, and what they actually do, because their conscious mind and the subconscious mind are working on different frequencies, right?
Beautiful.
And the subconscious mind doesn't speak language as we know it. You and I are conversing in English. The subconscious mind doesn't know English. The way that we actually communicate with the subconscious mind is through imagery and emotion. And we pattern in these new programs, like a computer program, in the same way that the original programs got patterned in, which was again by repetition of what we saw, what we felt, what we heard, right?
Mhm.
Emotion,
Mhm.
imagery, repetition. And so we can do this work to repattern these new thoughts. So you could imagine, let's say, an anxious preoccupied who has a core wounds of I am unlovable, like how that would be playing out in their life, right? Like how, they might not go to a particular social event because they
Mm,
think that they won't be, their presence won't be appreciated. People won't like them there. They might not, tell their secret
mm,
crush that they like them because why would they choose me? I'm so unlovable.
mm,
They may think that, their parents' emotional unavailability is because the child themselves or even the adult might think, well, I'm so unlovable. Of course, my parents don't love me. Not that the parents are emotionally unavailable. Like,
mm,
the child always makes it about themselves. And so when we can tackle those big core wounds, you can see almost like a stream how that would then impact if I no longer had this I am unlovable limiting belief that changes my thought pattern, my emotional pattern, and my behavior, right? So that's
beautiful.
the whole idea is to identify all of these core wounds, work to create new patterns, and then to create healthier strategies to engage with other people or in communication, setting boundaries, and coping mechanisms.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
And it is so logical ultimately when you
It's
actually look
logical,
at
it
it.
is.
Yes. So it is not just doable, but it's highly likely that you're going to be successful in achieving that outcome. It's highly likely that you will be able to be a very different person. Um, and but it's also quite likely that this is not a quick fix. It's very likely that you will have multiple breakthroughs, multiple, multiple chances of rediscovering how
Hmm.
certain parts of your part were playing out in response to a pattern. And of course, your memories will be different. So one day you will think, that's why that relationship ended up the way it was, or that's why I made that call in a business, for example. And it's beautiful, but it takes time. And you need to take the time to reflect and to think. And that is probably the biggest challenge in our nowadays environment. So busy, 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 where we keep ourselves busy. So here we have got a coping mechanism of avoidance, of escaping our reality, trying to work as
Hmm.
much as possible because that's not
Yeah.
just not just a great habit; it's socially accepted and applauded for.
Mhm.
When in reality, we're just following a pattern that was laid down in our childhood. How bizarre is that when you actually look at it from that angle?
Yeah, and you know what? It's when people start becoming aware of these things, they often have an aha moment. Like,
Mm,
so I'll use myself as an example. Like, I developed a level of I must earn my love
mm,
very early on. So I was celebrated in my family because I was like academically very strong. So I would bring home straight A's, and that's how I earned love
mm.
from my
Yeah,
father.
exactly,
um, not for who I was, but for what I produced, my achievements. And
exactly.
so it's not a difficult leap to understand that then I would grow up and be a perfectionist and I would be incredibly afraid of failure. I still hold that. Like it's something that I'm still working through because I was taught very early on that I had to learn, that I had to earn my love. And you know, failure is a sense of rejection.
Mm,
And so, some people think being a perfectionist is a good thing. It's not a good thing at all. It keeps you completely disconnected. But if you understand why you're doing it, you can then catch yourself. So on the days where I am pushing myself too hard, I stop and I go, why am I doing this?
mm.
So this is what healing is to me. Why am I doing this? If I don't send the next 5 emails today and I send them tomorrow, will anything change in my life? Will anyone love me less? Will anyone die? God forbid. No, no, no. Okay, I'm shutting down my laptop. Like, enough,
I love it.
right?
I love it.
Mm.
Beth, you're an amazing woman. Your
Thank
insights
you.
today are just, oh, wow. That was mind-blowing for me. And there was a lot of self-discovery there, a lot of moments of truth. I am humbled, having to say the least. And as I will go away from this interview and actually think, wow, okay. But it also showed me that there is a possibility to heal much more and to develop much more. And that is powerful. That is the true meaning of hope for me, and that I can become stronger, emotionally stronger, and less ridden by subconscious programs, but rather actually a more in control of my life.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Bev, you're an
Yeah.
amazing woman. If people want to know
Well,
more about you, where can they find you?
thank you so much. So my company is called Securely Loved. We are a group of practitioners who work in the space of relationship and attachment theory, or attachment traumas more specifically. So the website is securelyloved.com. My adult children, I have two sons, they're 18 and 20. My adult children have taught me TikTok. So how do you
Ah,
how to use TikTok. And so we're on TikTok. We're also on Instagram. The handle is securely_loved. I also have a YouTube channel, Securely Loved. So you can kind of find us everywhere. If you go to our website, I know you mentioned earlier on that you took the attachment quiz. So right on the homepage of securelyloved.com, there's a button that says attachment quiz. Please go ahead and take it. This is free, and it's private, so the results are never sent to me. It's just a tool for your own awareness.
hmm.
Um, and we also offer for folks that want to dive in and work with us, either individually or couples. We offer a free 20-minute consult as well. All of that can be booked through my website at securelyloved.com.
Brilliant. Guys, look down there into the description of the YouTube video and of the podcast, because you've got all of Beth's details there. Whilst you're down there, press the like and the subscribe button, and maybe leave a comment and say, wow, okay, what was the coolest thing you've learned from Beth today? There are certainly loads of them that I could write down. Beth, you're a lovely, lovely beacon of hope, a light in the darkness there. And I'm so pleased that you came onto my show. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the opportunity.
And you guys out there, look after yourself and live with intention. Bye.
I never give up. I never give up. I never give up. Turn around.